we went from it taking like 7 demos for someone to buy a 200 a month product to over the course of 9 to 12 months, like no demos actually. And it was just this constant iteration of taking the product feedback 8 times a day, 5 times a week, and putting it into the product really, really quickly. And it compounds over time. It can make a big impact.
Welcome to First Block, a Notion series where founders from the world's leading companies tell us what it was like to navigate the many firsts of their startup journey and what they learned from that experience. Our guest today is Varun Anand, co-founder of Clay. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is First Block. This is our Notion series where we dig in and try to get the unfiltered, raw stories.
Let's go.
We have the great pleasure of sitting down with Varun Anand, co-founder of Clay. I hope most folks will learn a lot about Clay. Super exciting company. It's sitting really at the intersection of AI and go-to-market and modernizing how people think about go-to-market and growth. We are a customer, a new customer ourselves. So very excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, well, we always like to kick off by taking you back in the time machine to the earlier days of getting started at Clay. The place I'd like to start is, what was the original problem that Clay was trying to solve, and where are things today in comparison to that vision?
Well, yeah, the original problem was and it's actually not so dissimilar actually from some of the original problems that the Notion was grappling with, which is kind of how can we bring the power of programming to an order of magnitude more people, right? And Kareem and there was a lot of exploration of kind of trying to understand what that journey could kind of look like. And ultimately, we kind of fell on the spreadsheet as a vehicle for that, as a medium for that. And then obviously noticing that a lot of go-to-market teams kind of use spreadsheets and use this to work with data. And then they kind of pushed us down into this. And now over time, the mission has kind of evolved. And now the mission is, how can we help grow businesses, right? Like how can we bring the power of creativity to more and more teams, and it's kind of evolved over time.
And how did you really get to that aha? I guess that like go-to-market was your ICP.
I would say it's definitely a long journey. So I'll give some context and backstory to the business, which is Kareem, my co-founder, actually originally started the business with his best friend Nikolai in 2017, and for the next 3-4 years, explored a lot of different mediums. They even built Retool before Retool. They built like Warp.dev before Warp. They even worked out of Notion's office in San Francisco with Ivan. So there was actually a lot of exploration, but not really too much commitment. I kind of come into the story like a few years into that, and similar to Akshay in many ways.
Yeah.
And I was building with no-code products at a previous company. I ran this little business unit, and my CEO was like, you don't get to work with any engineers, but you still have very high revenue targets. And so I was like, okay. And so I would just tinker and build with like Bubble and like other no-code. This was like in 2018, I would use Notion. This is a creative Notion use case, and I would use Notion as a client portal for our companies. And so none of the companies knew that there was Notion. They thought that we custom built this client portal for them. And it was like one of these value props. So that was part of our like product suite. And it was crazy because, in InsurTech, the bar is kind of low, from a product quality perspective. And so no code can actually get you pretty far. And so then I left to start a company. I explore a lot of these ideas. I'm really interested in no code. I happened to be in a Slack group about it, and someone posted about a webinar for Clay. Clay at the time, very horizontal, still spreadsheet UI, kind of similar, but very horizontal use cases. No customers or users really. So I joined this webinar, but no one else shows up. It was just me. So they wanted to cancel it, but I was like, no, let's do this. And so I started using the product, and I'm like, whoa, what is this? This is kind of crazy, And I was like obsessed with the idea. So I cold emailed Kareem, and he doesn't even respond to me. He's like silent meditating at a retreat. And then Nikolai responds to me though, and we have very similar energy, so we hit it off. And then Nikolai leaves actually, like shortly thereafter. So I start spending time with them, and I was like, this seems like a perfect time to join and work on this. And so, we teamed up, we reflected, we kind of realized that, go to market is like the focus and we kind of want to commit to this. We kind of launched the product on Product Hunt. And then we kind of went from there.
So obviously you found product market fit. Curious what advice you would give to this group related to when you have product market misfit. What should founders be looking for? Do you have a perspective on that?
Ultimately, at that point, what you are constrained by is your insight, and a way of thinking about it. What you are not constrained by is time. And so there is, you actually have all the time in the world. And so there's a lot of commentary on X and wherever about how hard people are working and the grind that everyone's on and stuff like that. And I think that is counterproductive and a little deceiving. Really, the missing ingredient to you finding product market fit is a way of thinking and thinking about a problem differently than, your competitor or whatever, and having some unique insight. And usually, not always, but usually grinding really hard and working really hard, might give you more cycles. It might, if you're doing it smartly, might help you iterate way faster, but it's not maybe the best way to have to unlock the creativity that you need to find that insight. And that I think is what you should think about optimizing for. And yeah.
Insights.
Yeah.
Find the insights.
Well, yeah, that's the thing you're constrained by. Because if you have the insight, you can execute. If you don't have the insight, then you're kind of screwed. You don't have anything, and you're searching for the insight. And I think it can come in different ways. There's a really good book by this guy, Ken Stanley. He's it's called Greatness Cannot Be Planned. More or less, the point of the book is that greatness cannot be planned. And it's this very weird kind of journey. And he proves it actually in a lot of computer science experiments and things like that. And ultimately, you're trying to find greatness. Product market fit is greatness, right? Because if you have it, you can build an iconic, great company. And, there are a lot of applications of his concepts and how you plan an organization, how you run goal setting at a company, things like that. And goal setting processes famous for stifling our creativity, right? And one of the things he recommends is just following interestingness, right? So once you follow it, then you have to have the skill to acknowledge it for what it is and then double down and go for it and hustle and execute.
So you found your good product market fit at Clay.
Yeah, electric product market fit.
Electric. Okay, I like it. Electric product market fit. What did you learn, I guess, in those early days? How were you experimenting with customers? Were you getting surprised by how they were using the product? And what were they showing back to you? And how are you taking that forward in terms of the product development?
In the early days, now Clay, Notion is a self-serve product. So you can go online, you can buy it. Still a little hard to use. But, then that was almost impossible to use. And so we were basically running a sales-led motion for a 200 a month product, which is, as many people tell you, is unprofitable and cannot scale and not a good idea. But Kareem and I were both very insistent that we can turn this into a self-serve motion. This can be a product motion. We kind of just almost irrationally believed that it would happen. And it did happen, but the way it happened, I think, is somewhat systematic and is something that people here can emulate. And we would all do these demos, and basically what would happen is we'd call it a reverse demo. Let's just say I was doing it with Nick here, okay? And Nick works at some company, and I would send him an email. He signs up for a demo. I would say, hey, come to this demo, Nick, with a use case in mind. Some data you want to enrich. That was our first use case. And we'll make it happen. And my goal was to blow Nick's mind, okay? My goal was to solve his problem in the first 20, 25 minutes. He would share a screen. I would just draw little things on the screen and tell him what to do. And, he would run into a million little issues. And I would take notes of all the little issues, and I would work with our team. And I was doing this 8 times a day, And so we went from it taking 7 demos for someone to buy a 200 a month product to, over the course of 9 to 12 months, no demos actually. And it was just this constant iteration of taking the product feedback 8 times a day, 5 times a week, and putting it into the product really, really quickly, and it compounds over time, it can make a big impact. And that's kind of how we like hacked together a self-serve motion over like several months from what was originally a very bad motion.
What's the most surprising way you've seen someone using clay?
Um,
Like the weirdest way?
the weirdest way. I think there's all sorts of crazy use cases. So like people are um, programmatically creating websites at scale in really interesting ways. People are powering companies through Clay. People are like generating tarot card readings for people through Clay. I was helping people find OBGYNs who are licensed in certain ways in Clay. Um, the core use cases are finding more customers and growing your business, right? But the limit to Clay, as is to Notion, is your creativity.
All right, so as you're curious to how you think about scaling,
Yeah.
so you have like the self-serve motion and you have sales.
Yeah.
How did you think about moving from like smaller customer acquisition to larger customers or enterprise sales motion?
Yeah. So we didn't think about it until we felt good about the self-serve motion. And so what does feeling good about the self-serve motion mean? Well, it means that it works kind of in a systematic way without too much intervention, and it can scale. So that means a few things. First of all, like what is a self-serve motion? It's creating demand, it's converting the demand on your website, it's activating users in a product, and it's monetizing them in some effective way, right? And ideally they're expanding in a way that makes sense because you have a value metric that makes sense in your pricing. And so I felt like we had that. Now, I don't think everything was dialed to the max and everything was perfected, of course, but we had the basics. We also made a hire that I trusted, right? We hired Bruno, who was our head of growth marketing at the time and now our current head of marketing. And I felt, that he could continue that and scale what we had built in an initial way. And so I was like, okay, we feel good about this. And these building blocks feel secure and we know how to scale them because we've already gotten to this point. So that feels like good. We have a plan and we have someone in place who can scale that. Great. Now, why do sales? Well, for us, I was like, it was just simple. It was like, if we want to be a generational company, we need other generational companies to use our product. The tricky thing about that is that the generational companies did not want to use our product without a lot of help. And we're not able to do it in a self-serve kind of way. And so we were like, okay, I guess we have to do sales. And so that was the original impetus. And, you know, we were like, okay, well, how are we going to get people to pay us a lot of money? So I was like, okay, well, maybe we just do the work for them. That's what they keep asking for. So maybe we can just do the work for them, which is what they call professional services. And so we did that a couple times. Bad idea. Um, that was bad because, first of all, we were competing against our own agency network. So one of the contributing factors to this electric product market fit is this really robust agency network that we have. So we have hundreds of agencies, many of them making more than $1 million a year, and they help people grow their business using Clay. And so we were competing against them, and by doing our own thing. So that didn't make them super happy. And then, by the way, it was an insane amount of work, and it just wasn't a scalable model that made sense for us at that price point. And so, okay, let's try something else. Let's try software pricing. So the issue for me was like, why would people buy this? Why would people spend so much money on this? Because I was like, you could just pay on the website, But it turns out some people can't pay on the website because they don't have the time, they don't have the prioritization, the security doesn't allow it. They need help. There's all these reasons why some people just can't do that. And so it just became, for me in my mind, it was less about selling, which I don't emotionally vibe with as much, and more like, okay, let me help you find your fit. And what is your fit? Like, is your fit the self-serve plan? Because great, let's do that. Or is your fit this other plan and it's priced to your needs? So we tried platform fee as a first thing. It was like a fixed cost, and then you had like usage-based credits on top. The reason the platform fee thing was bad for us was because, well, I don't know if any of you have negotiated with a procurement person, but it is not fun. Not a fun vibe, and they will tear apart a platform fee. And so we did that for a bunch of customers. We realized it was hard to expand and whatever, and really we wanted it to be aligned, right? And so then we ultimately bundled it all together into this like one credit-based pricing. Took a lot of inspiration from Snowflake's pricing, and realized that was a much more effective way of scaling, and it aligned with our customers. And we learned how to like paint the picture of like where we can get people to, and really be much more detail oriented in understanding like their use cases. So we pivoted to just focusing on data enrichment. We are best in the world at that, truly. Um, and we were just, and the reason it works is because everyone has this problem. Everyone is paying for too many data vendors. They all feel the data quality is bad. It's too many to manage. So it's like everyone has this pain, and then we can prove it, like quantifiably. We can prove it. We can run a data test. They have budget for it. It's an existing line item. We can compete against that. We're very flexible, so you can start with it without having to cut all these other vendors. Over time, you can consolidate. So that's what we start with everyone with, and it makes sense. And then once we have that trust, once we have the contract, we then get you to the dream. And we do these hackathons like we just did with the Notion team, where we help you build these really unique workflows that are way more creative and way more interesting and impactful than just, data enrichment as a starting point.
I love that. You've got a very clear front door. We kind of say this in Notion land, where the pain, the budget line item, that's super important related to the data enrichment. And then you bring people to the core platform, the magic that can come after that, which is amazing. I know you shared a lot of good lessons there, but is there anything else, like upon reflection, that in terms of scaling a sales motion that you feel like nobody talks about, that like you've learned a lesson on, that if you did it over again? I know you're still in earlier days, but.
I mean, there are a lot of lessons. I wouldn't necessarily learn from all of our lessons. There are a lot of like unique things that we do in our sales motion. It's still early, but there's like 25 or 30 sales people. I mean, first of all, we don't even hire salespeople to do sales. We invented this role called go-to-market engineering, and it's one of the fast-growing roles right now. And it's basically people who are building systems to grow businesses and using AI and tooling to do that. For us, we have go-to-market engineers at our team. We have a team that does that, but we also have them do sales. Now, I wouldn't recommend that to most companies because you're not the company that invented this role, so it doesn't resonate as much. But for us, it works. This approach just leads to a very different type of sale, because it's a much more trust-based approach in sales. It's a much more consultative approach, right? Like, so it's just that if you're being sold to by a seller who's incentivized in certain ways, it's just a different dynamic than if you are sitting across the table from someone who is not financially incentivized to close you, who is actually who has done your role before, who can deeply empathize with that. And you guys can work together to find the fit that makes sense for you. There's this one framework I learned from this guy, Dennis Leandros, who was the CRO of Procore for more than a decade. Very smart guy. And he taught me this framework about like the types of wins that you want in sales. So you want, there are 4 wins you need to win a sale. You need a political win, you need a technical win, you need like the legal win, and you need like the commercial win, the pricing win, right? And, I think our team is very effective at the technical and the legal and the pricing, the quarterly, like all that comes very naturally. But the political win is the win that's most correlated or most associated with more traditional sales skill sets, like champion-based selling, following a sales framework like Medic or something, discovery, all this type of stuff, right? And so yes, are people not the best at the things that are more associated with sales skills, which is like a discovery call with an exec at the beginning? Sure. But does that trade-off come with being amazing with your, like the main builder who's working on your thing, building trust, all that creates this long-term relationship that scales and has a good foundation? Yeah, and so I think that everything comes with trade-offs. It's just knowing the thing that matters to you, and just tripling down on it, and not being afraid to build your company around it.
Yeah, love that. I think go-to-market engineer, you guys are kind of like everyone's looking at Clay's model as very interesting, in terms of, kind of creating a different perspective on how things can be done. And I think what's interesting about it is it's very outcomes focused for the customer, which is, I think, super important. I think, why I think a lot of people are talking about your go-to-market engineering role is because of the way that AI, what things will become in the future, and more outcome-based ways of thinking and engaging with a customer. So I think you're onto something very interesting.
I do think one quick thing on that is like there are some other teams, like some common denominators that other teams like OpenAI, for example, is finding a lot of success with this as well, which is, and you don't have to call it this, but it's just like people who are very product minded. If you have someone who's truly product obsessed, they will be a much more better representation of your company and working with that prospect than someone else necessarily.
So speaking of like the team, so the go-to-market engineering role is very interesting. You guys are definitely pioneers there. Are there other like counterintuitive hiring decisions or hiring philosophies?
Oh yeah, so many.
Okay, hit it.
Yeah.
Hit us with it.
We always hire people who have never done the job before. The go-to-market engineer is case in point, right? But I would argue that maybe like of the non-EPD org, maybe more than half of the company is in roles they've never done before. The one thing you have to think about when you hire people from different backgrounds and put them into different places is you have to understand where they're coming from. And so, on the GTM team, like we just hired a growth investor to be on the GTM team, right? And so that's a very different compensation background and where they're coming from. And like there are certain roles that are historically not prioritized. We try to take every function very seriously and think about it very thoughtfully. The only thing is you have to pay up because you can't eat your cake and have it too in this. Like you think about it differently, but you're bringing in someone with a very different skill set and a very different background and whatever, and that comes with different compensations. You can't be like, okay, I want to get this amazing person with all this experience to do this very different thing, and then this role comes with this compensation and expect that. You have to be flexible in that because you're paying for this different thing. Now there is an ROI to that because you're obviously getting a very different caliber person than maybe is traditionally in those fields, or at least someone with very different set of experiences who's now in those fields, right? And you think that's going to pay off for your company or be really valuable.
A lot of corollaries to Notion too. Talent density
Yeah.
has been a big focus of ours. We always say we like to keep the bus small, but it's a really interesting bus that you're on. So for the Clay bus, curious peek under the hood, you got all these amazing people on the team. What's like the most unique way that you all run internally that like you would give advice on that helps you move fast, shared context, the tight feedback loops? Is there any like secret sauce into something unique you all are doing?
I don't know if there's like a secret sauce necessarily. I do think that like the philosophy of how we build the company and the cultural values that we have are somewhat unique. Like Kareem reads poetry at the beginning of every all hands, for example. A lot of things like that. But I do think like, so for example, we just published like our operating principles to the team, and we just published it publicly as well, so you can see them. And there's a lot of things there that I think represent how we operate, and like the tactics and the specific things that really matter to us. I think like one of the core values of the company is like negative maintenance. And so like how can we do things that take things off other people's plates and being very proactive and thoughtful about that. So I think that's like a core value that we try to really practice.
In terms of AI, I
Yeah.
have to ask it, is there anything that you're using from like an AI perspective that's adding outsized value to the company?
I mean, obviously, Clay. We use it extensively in the company in many different use cases. Obviously, the go-to-market ones, but even well beyond, like looking at all of our support tickets and analyzing who we should do upsells with, to how we do QBRs, to we're not even updating Salesforce manually anymore because we're using Clay to analyzing Gong transcripts to update things. So there's like so many use cases of Clay across the business. I think outside of that, there are a lot of other products. We use probably a lot of the products that a lot of the people in this room use, right? Like Gong and Cursor and Windsurf and Notion AI.
Any hot takes on AI in general? AI in startup land?
I think there is a lot of peer pressure around AI. And I think like if you're on X and stuff like that, there's a lot of like, oh, I'm doing it this way. If you're not doing it, you're gonna fall behind. All these things like, and I think there's this like real pressure of like you have to use it for everything, and it's gonna take over all these elements of the world. But I also think there are like these trade-offs, right, with it, and it, like we should also be cognizant of that, right? And it's easy to fall into that like pressure environment, like especially in your personal life as well, right? But like if everyone's just on ChatGPT or Claude, asking all these questions and turning their lives there, what does that mean to our interpersonal relationships, right? Like, if you turn to all these apps for therapy and coaching and advice, when will you turn to your friends? And what impact is that going to have? And I don't know the answer to these things, but I just think that uh, more is definitely not always better. And I don't know what's better or what's worse, but I just think that listening to your instinct and listening to what feels good to you should kind of come first, and for everyone that's kind of different.
I think the interpersonal side, that's the most important thing. But yes, you sounds like you're well adopted though on the AI side. That was
In the company, in the company,
a
yeah.
number of tools. Love that. Advice for this group, going to transition to a couple of things that we usually like to ask our folks that join us for First Block. What's one building block advice you'd leave behind for early stage founders in particular?
I think I'd probably go to the comment I was making before about Ken Stanley and how greatness cannot be planned, and how each building block gets you to the next stepping stone, right? Each stepping stone gets you to the next one. Um, and look, I think for us, like, we were starting with cold email agency owners, right? I think no one would have invested in that. If we were telling people, hey, we're going to sell B2B software to cold email agency owners, like no one in Silicon Valley would invest in something like that, right? But it's like, what you're doing is you're just listening to your instinct, you're listening to the feedback you're getting, and you're following your curiosity, and not and like, there's a temptation at the earliest of stages to operate almost like an investor, like thinking about the market size and is this big enough and what about these competitors, but it's easy to like kind of get overwhelmed by that, and instead, like, think about the insight, think about how you're thinking about it differently, and follow that, and then follow your instinct about the next step, and then kind of keep going from there.
If you had to restart, build Clay from scratch, what's the first block you would start with?
I would I would just say authenticity, because I think if you have that, and if you're just building something that's authentic to you, then everything else will kind of work out. Like, forget commercial success or not, but if you're just building something that's authentic to you, then you won't have regret, right? And you're doing something that feels good. And even if it's not commercially successful, you are authentic to yourself, and that's ultimately what matters. And commercial success is a bonus. The whole company history of Clay is deliberately doing something wrong. Like, who else? I mean, it's very similar to the Notion journey, right? But like, who else would spend 4 or 5 years wandering in the darkness and exploring different ideas and not committing to anything? And then when you finally commit, like, and then one of the co-founder leaves, other people leave, and then you commit to something, and then you start with cold email agency owners, then you hire people who've never done the job before, and then you like this all. The whole company history is, I think, doing things that feel deliberately wrong, but I think do feel authentic, and so ultimately that's all that matters.
Love that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Varun, for sharing all of the insights. We really appreciate it. Clay, please check out Clay. It is definitely the modern way of approaching growth in the future. As you heard, Notion is early on our journey. It's been fantastic thus far, so thank you.
Thanks.